Hi everyone, and welcome to the next event in our Working with Couples conference, Person-Centred Couples Counselling with Allan Turner and Kate Stubbings. Allan and Kate, a warm welcome back to Online Events. It's really great to have you again.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Well, and it's really nice to have you on this day where we're really focusing on how we work with couples and what can be useful. And it's great to have you here to think about some of the person-centred theory and a way of doing this work. So thank you for making time in your very busy schedule. It's great.
Pleasure.
And a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us live on the site. It's great to have so many people here with us. Sandra's in the chat room, making sure that everybody's okay. So thank you, Sandra. And if anybody is struggling to get in, just give Sandra a shout. She can help you do that. If you've got any questions or comments for Allan and Kate, I know they'll both be up for taking some feedback and having a bit of interaction around that too. So that'd be lovely. And of course, if you're catching us up in the library or you're just relaxing on a Monday afternoon, that's fine too. Please don't feel that you must be in the chat room to be in the event. We're really pleased to have you here. Yeah. As we're getting started, we usually do a little bit of context, a bit of geography, and I guess we've got you both in your counselling rooms that you use for Counselling Works. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Yep. We're in the Stony Stratford premises.
Mm-hmm.
I work in the Bedford premises mainly.
Yeah.
And we're in Allan's office and room at the moment.
Fantastic. Oh, well, it's really nice to be invited into your office and room, Allan. Thank you. And yeah, and Counselling Works has premises over those two locations, I guess.
We're in Stony Stratford's in Milton Keynes, the north of the city, and then Bedford's 20 odd miles away, 22, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
East.
And you've got a number of colleagues, I guess, that work along with you and use the rooms. And
Got about 20 affiliates here, but then Angela was telling me the other day, we've got 44 people renting rooms from us, so
wow,
it's quite big.
Yeah, that's and it's a long history as well. Counselling Works has been going for some time as well.
Yeah, we incorporated in 2002. And I think we were trading prior to that in the late 90s.
So it's a real solid history and a business and a practice with lots of energy. It's great to hear that.
Yeah, we're still very busy.
We're
happy to say.
Yes. Yeah, great. And could you both say a little bit about the kind of work that you do and the training that you do in Counselling Works? Would that be okay? Or
Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
Well,
Kate or Allan? Or
I suspect we're probably quite similar answers to that, but the two areas of enormous interest to us are couples and clients on the autistic spectrum, and very often they're the same thing.
Yes, we discovered the clients on the autistic spectrum very much through our couples work, so the two kind of slotted in together.
Yeah.
And on our training course for couples counselling, person-centred couples counselling, we start the next one next week, and we have a section on that for autism, autistic traits that you might find in a couple or someone, a member of a couple.
Yeah, like often couples will come into therapy and actually maybe one of the reasons for that is one member of the couple has autistic traits.
But they're often unaware of it. So that turns out to be what's causing the difficulty in the relationship, but they don't know that.
Yes. And of course, we've done some work together around this. You've done a demonstration, I guess, that's in the library. So I would really encourage colleagues to check that out because you both have developed some thinking around how we might work differently when we realise, like when we can make that assessment, I guess.
Present. Yeah.
It does make a difference.
Oh, I could easily get into that conversation right now. It's so interesting, isn't it?
Yes, and I suppose it's all about communication breaking down with a couple, which is very much where couples counselling of any type, I suppose, does come in anyway.
Yeah, that communication is
Yes.
so vital in terms of being in a relationship, being in a couple relationship. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned your course. I wanted to make sure that we didn't miss that. It's starting next week for the 26th time, am I remember?
That's right, yes.
Well remembered.
Yes.
Yeah, 26th time next Thursday.
Yeah, where colleagues can come along and train to work with counsellors, with couples.
Course. Yeah, we run a 6-day course. We're looking for counsellors who are already experienced. So, as a sort of rule of thumb, we say roughly at BACP accreditation level, and then we're going to put the couples work on top. As will no doubt come out in the next hour, our work is entirely person-centred, so we're looking at applying person-centred principles to couples.
Yeah, great. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and of course, the course is a context to really get immersed in that thinking and do some practice. There is some space next week if anybody is tempted, and of course, you do run again in September.
September, yes. Yeah. There's 2 spaces left for next week. We try to limit it to about 12. We've got 10 next week, so we could take a couple more. And it's all wide open in September. I think we've sold 1 place so far. So
Great. Well, thanks for spending a little bit of time just talking about your training. We'll make sure that it's linked up in the resource guide so colleagues can check it out on the website.
Great. Yeah.
I'm really pleased that we're having this conversation here in the day. I was saying to you earlier, we've had a couple of conversations around what happens when a couple has gone off sex. We talked to Steph about that, and Paula was helping us to think about what happens when one in the couple has an addiction to sex. And that kind of work can be very active, I guess, in terms of the therapist. And here we're going to take some time to think about person-centered theory, like how you think about that in connection with couples and how that informs how you are, I guess, like what you do in the counselling room. So that it feels like a really nice change of pace in the day to kind of think about something quite different. So yeah, looking forward to that. It can be easy for colleagues to say, oh right, so what are the differences? I don't know, that might be a place to start, or did you have an idea where you might want to start the journey?
I think it's important, with us being person-centred, I think it's important to us that we work with the 2 individuals in a couple, both person-centredly, both at the same time. So if you're working person-centredly with an individual, you've got 2 in the room that you're doing the same thing with, and of course each could be in very different places and feeling very different things. So that's where the complications come in, probably, to work with in a person-centered way.
Yeah. So where's the challenge, like that kind of regard, the unconditional regard for 2 people who might be opposed to each other at some times, and like that's a challenge to value both positions? Or?
Yes, you do value each individual, and of course it's holding that balance of being able to empathise with each equally and not taking sides at all, which is the challenge probably to start with.
And I guess we start with the assumption that each of them are telling us the truth, and they're telling us how they experience the world, even if they're very contradictory. sometimes those contradictions make more sense than they initially sound as if they are. And in particular, they're describing the world as they are seeing it. They're describing their world.
Right. So that sounds like we're making contact with one of Roger's real core assumptions about the person, that we all experience the world in our very own individual way.
Yeah, exactly.
Our subjective experience. So if I've just got one person in front of me, maybe that's easier in some ways. Or
yes, it's easy for the two of you with one client just to. So I'm hesitating, John, because I realise email is still flashing in. Are you getting pings your end?
I can just hear a little sound, but it's all right. Yeah, it'll be fine. Fine.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I distracted myself there. Yeah. So with one client, obviously it's very easy, isn't it, to sort of engage and empathise and be in that client's world. You know, so he's terribly cruel to you, and he's controlling, and he even threatens violence sometimes. How dreadful that must be. But it becomes a different ball game when the other person is there, and they've got their reasons for being who they are and how they are, and valuing both equally.
Yes, and I think the experience of being with a couple is quite different to being with an individual, in that you often get an individual report to you the problems they're having in their relationship. But with a couple, you often are seeing the problems happen live before you. So it's really very much immediately in the moment and responding to what's going on in the moment. And sometimes they're saying things to each other that neither have heard each other say before. So it's quite powerful stuff, painful, emotional.
They literally can come in the room, make life-changing decisions that they didn't know they were going to make before they came into the room. So it's very, very, it's powerful for them, but it's powerful for us actually as well. That's an enormous experience to be with somebody when they're making such important life-altering changes.
And I guess that could go either way. It could be like a further commitment to each other, or someone might be surprised to find themselves at the end of a relationship that they might not have. Is that,
Yes. Yeah, and you can be in really the darkest places with some couples and think, you wonder, well, they're probably not going to come through this. And sometimes they do. It's amazing what people do come through, the very rocky patches that a couple can come through and still come out the other side and want to be together.
Yeah. So it's important not to make that conclusion too quickly about the couple and make it.
No, you don't make it at any point, John.
Very
you
much
just stay. You stay with where they're going and try and support them, even if that is they're separating.
Yes.
If they can separate in a way where they don't hate each other too much, and especially if there's children, that's still a good result.
Yeah. So just staying with the other person or with the couple, I guess, and like part of seeing it happen in front of us, I guess the dramas in couple relationships can be so strong.
Very, very powerful. Yeah.
It can be easy to be drawn into that as a therapist or something, or like to maybe want to side with one or the other, or what's that like?
I don't know if it's a matter of experience. I very seldom feel any seduction to take sides there. I think it's just about. I think as a counsellor, you're in trouble if you want to take sides.
I agree. Yes, I never feel it. I think it's, if you were to feel it, I think the couple would know it, and I think you've lost them. And I really don't feel it. I'm just really interested in what's happening and why each feel as they do, in whatever that looks like at the time.
And of course, what almost always happens is they each come in very strongly trying to pursue their position, and there's almost a sense that if I bang the other one over the head hard enough with my argument, then they'll see it.
Yes.
And of course, the real point is to get them to see each other's arguments, to understand what that experience is like for the other one. And when they start doing that, the world starts to look different.
And I think it can be a relief for the one who's being blamed by the other when they first come, because I think they might think, oh, you know, the counsellor's going to also take sides here and see that I'm the one who's wrong. And when that doesn't happen, that can open up a whole new area of communication and giving them a voice too.
Right. So the couple really being able to experience that whichever one of you is the therapist, I guess, or that the therapist isn't taking sides, is like solidly for each person in the relationship, makes a big difference, I can imagine. And
yes, I think both of us would say we don't view a couple as anyone being right or wrong. You know, definitely not wrong. We see that each are entitled to what's going on for them and feel what they feel.
And each person's subjective world will make sense to them.
Yes.
Yeah. So for the therapist to understand both of those subjective worlds, and then that each other understands.
Yeah, well, that's what you gradually hope. Sometimes that happens relatively quickly. Sometimes that's very difficult for them to give up their own position and start to accept what it feels like for the other one. But you won't make any progress till they can get to that place.
And I think, as Allan said, there's a reluctance to move from their positions sometimes. And I think within themselves, there's something going on. It can be a bit of a crisis. There can be a personal crisis going on when they're starting to hear their partner differently to the way they'd always heard them. And it, you know, that can take a little while or not.
But that makes sense that for someone, their subjective reality, how they've experienced the world, is starting to shift quite profoundly then. Someone they've lived with for a long time.
Quite disturbing, you know, to suddenly discover that the person closest to you isn't the way you had them down as. That's a real big shift in your life to realise that.
Yeah.
Yes, there can be a lot of assumptions, one of the other, and of each other, and a lot of assumptions are made. And I've often heard he or she thinks this, and they think that, and they think the other, and he or she may not actually think the way they're being assumed to think, and that might not be the meaning in what is going on.
Yeah. Well, in a relationship, we see each other through our own subjective reality, I guess. We're looking out from our own worlds, and we kind of assume the other person lives in that exact same reality.
We've got this explanation of how the world works, and we've got our partner in a particular place in that explanation, and it's quite a radical thing to accept that they're not who you thought they were. The explanation you've had is actually wrong. The other person's actually quite nice.
Yes. And that how the other person makes sense to them in their reality, I guess, and
change their reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Difficult. Yeah.
And there can always be a bigger picture for each, I think, you know, in their own histories, an experience of life can inform the way they respond to each other. So all that goes on as well.
Yeah, like so much of our early family experiences are being played out in our partnered relationships too, and
quite possibly.
Maybe, but we, of course, don't place emphasis on that.
Okay.
Because that doesn't fit with our person-centered way of seeing things. I suppose from one of the things we've been saying so far that you can see, we see each partner as having their own actualizing tendency, but we don't see the couple as having an actualizing tendency. Seeing two totally separate people interacting with one another, and that's quite different from much couples theory, which may not use the words actualizing tendency, but will certainly use the concept that there's this sort of third party in the room, which is the couple, as opposed to two individuals.
Yeah, like the relationship might have an energy or a personality of its own. And so, can you say a little bit about why you wouldn't see it like that? Like the actualizing tendency rests within the individual only?
Well, yeah, to answer that, the corollary of where you were getting to, there plainly is something about a couple that is separate and different, but from a person-centered perspective, that's the formative tendency. It's this tendency where groups of people, even if it's as small as two people or it's a family or bigger, they tend to form together and cooperate and assist one another. So the formative tendency we don't deny at all. But the actualizing tendency is very much personal to the individual. It's the sense is who I think I am in the world and the sense I make of the world. Now, if you start to see that that's what the actualizing tendency means, it doesn't make sense that two people together then start to form something new, a new life form. You can produce children, but not a new psychological life form.
Yeah, like our subjective reality is really rooted in our individual organism. Yeah.
So that's really fundamental to informing much of the way we then work. Because we don't try to direct people, we don't try to, we certainly don't interpret for them, which is why I was saying, well, yes, I guess childhood influences may have some significance for people, but they're not something that we work with, because it makes no sense within our theory.
Yes, we see that one or both people in the relationship could be incongruent, and if it's just one who's incongruent, it can cause an incongruence in the relationship. If one person is incongruent, the other might be tiptoeing around them a bit or not daring to say certain things, which then makes that person incongruent in a way.
But it's the individual, it's not the relationship that's incongruent.
Right, yeah. So in terms of like working with the individual's actualizing tendency, or both individuals' actualizing tendency, I guess. So can you say a little bit more about how, like that stance of not interpreting, like it is about your empathy kind of releases that actualizing tendency?
Very much the person-centered values, that we're valuing the individual, we're trying to understand the individual, but of even greater importance when working with a couple is we're hoping they can learn to understand one another.
And they're experiencing, probably, we don't actually know because they don't tell us, but they're experiencing us as understanding each of them, and both could be saying completely opposing things and different things, but we're understanding each of them equally and showing that empathy equally.
With the hope that they might be able to find a way to do that for each other. They experience it with you, and then they find that. Is that part of your thinking? Or?
Yes, but not in terms of modelling.
Yes, it's not.
Okay. Yeah. So it's important to catch that this is not a modelling exercise.
No, exactly. It is frequently a consequence of what we do. You know, if I were counselling John and Kate, I'm going to be listening to what John is saying, and I'm feeding back to be certain that I've understood you and I've got your feeling. Kate's listening. So I'm hoping she starts to understand that as well. But I'm not modelling how she should be. So I'm having a therapeutic relationship with two people simultaneously in front of each other.
Because the things that, if Allan were counselling you and I, that you might be saying to Allan normally, if you were trying to say them to me as a partner, if I were your partner, I might be jumping in and
shouting down,
shouting and defensive, and you might not ever really get fully understood. Whereas when you'd be talking to Allan, he would be fully understanding you, and I might not have heard that before.
Yeah, so if we're in a partnered relationship, there might be things that I'm wanting to say that are not easy to hear, but I can say them to Allan and feel understood in that, and feel...
And as I understand it, we can get deeper into it, because you touch the edge that you're kind of aware of, but then as I empathise, and that seems really important to you, John, what you just said there. It felt like it was hard for you to even say it. You get deeper into it, and Kate's then hearing deeper and deeper stuff that she's not heard before.
Quite a crisis. That could be quite a crisis for me, because I've always made this assumption about who you are, what you do, and how you think and how you behave. And
turns out to be wrong.
I could be very well have got it all wrong.
Yeah. And that's the thing about the subjective realities, like knowing that everyone experiences the world in a really unique way. Yeah. But all of our behaviours make sense in the light of that experience, I guess.
That's right. Everybody is doing their best, even though they're very contradictory.
Yeah. So when my partner understands the reality I'm experiencing, like my behaviour makes sense then. Yeah. Okay.
And it doesn't always happen. Sometimes people understand that different reality and say, yeah, I get that, I still don't want one. I don't want it. But I would say more often than not, when they do understand better, they view it differently. And the more common outcome when we work with couples is that they stay together than separate. But that's not what always happens. So it seems to me perfectly fair and legitimate for people to say, yes, I now understand where she's coming from, but I still don't want it.
I think quite often when couples don't stay together, they were never going to anyway. I think quite often they've come to counselling, but one does know that they're leaving the relationship anyway. I think that's often the case, wouldn't you say?
Could be.
Yeah.
But that kind of almost leaving the relationship in a less harsh way might be possible if both partners understand each other, understand the different realities, and it might not change the outcome, but it might, how people are in that outcome.
Maybe that living together for them was just not going to work. It was going to be too difficult.
Yeah.
But they've still got children to bring up. They've still got a shared history. So,
and I think if they are going to break up, if they can understand how that happened and why it happened and what made that happen, then maybe that they can have closure to that and wouldn't carry something else on into another relationship.
Yeah, that makes sense. So many relationships are a photocopy of the last relationship, or at least it's so hard for us as partners not to do what we did the last time, I guess. And
it's that you've heard that phrase that every general fights the previous war.
I haven't, but it makes sense to me. Yeah.
So what should we have done last time to have won that war? I'll do that this time.
Yeah.
Because this is a new situation.
Yeah.
If you don't want to fight the last war, you want to fight this one.
So understanding ourselves and having that self-empathy can help us
incredibly
be different.
Yes.
For us, of course, it means because there's so much respect for the individuals, we're not in any way directing them. So we virtually, we can't say it's completely unknown, but it's virtually unknown for us to see one partner individually. Because we're not trying, we don't want to hear secrets. Because we're not trying to direct them anywhere, there's actually nothing we can do with the information if we see one of them on their own. So we won't direct them in terms of whether we see them, seeing them individually, and equally we won't direct them within the session. We won't say who can speak. Would you like to speak for 10 minutes, and then would you like to speak for 10 minutes? We won't do anything of that nature.
We really trust the process of what's going on.
I can hear that, yeah, for sure. And it sounds actually it's the listening or the hearing, I guess, of each other, the hearing of the partner speaking to the therapist, hearing myself speak to the therapist. That's where the healing and the change is, not in the therapist's expertise or.
Absolutely, no. And I guess it goes through phases. To start with, often it's a conversation between the therapist and individual clients, and then they get to a point where they start talking to each other, and we can get to the point where we do not speak for 20 or 30 minutes because they're talking to each other. But of course, what we're doing is monitoring everything that's being said, and we're very, very closely following it. And if we think the other one hasn't picked up the meaning, there's just poor communication, then we would say, well, is that actually what you were trying to say? Was that your meaning? Is that how you felt or not? And very often it's possible to suggest a word that fits better.
And I think both of us hear time and time again from couples, this is a safe place. The counselling room becomes a safe place for them to have.
We'll wait till we get
either
to the
their arguments or their
say.
communications. I think when they're at home, there can be slamming of doors, walking off, going down the pub. Different things happen and make matters worse. Whereas when they are in our room, they don't go out slamming the door and that kind of thing. They're actually in a place where they're listening, and it's a calmer environment. And at times I've heard, and I know Allan has, that people say this is a safe place, and they know as a few sessions go by that they're coming to that safe place and they've got something they need to talk about, and they'll use that safe place to do that in.
Yeah. So instead of doing it on their own and then the wheels come off, if you like, it's like to be able to get into the therapy room and
then say the difficult to say things.
Yes. Yeah.
Makes sense, yeah. Well, I've noticed a question in the chat room that I guess must come up loads of times around the directivity. So let me ask the question and let's think some more about this. So I'm wondering whether, is there a minimum of directivity regarding process? Maybe one partner's more dominant and the other partner doesn't get the chance to speak. What then? And I think that can be the fear, especially when we haven't worked much with couples. How do we manage it when there can be so much heat in the room? And
we try not to direct that. We try to accept what people bring. And sometimes I'd say probably it's often the case that certainly in the first session, one of them will be more verbose. They'll say more. Sometimes they by the second session blown themselves out, so that
they've said all the things they need to say, and they needed to say it first. Maybe
they needed to work that way. But obviously, for some people, they are just very dominant and they do keep talking. I think Kate works the same way. I will be patient with that for quite a long time. By about the fourth session, I may say, Bill, you've done a superb job of explaining your position. I think I've really got that now. Unfortunately, I've not heard very much from Jane. I'm wondering whether Jane might be able to explain more. But that will be some way down the line.
Yes, I wouldn't point out that one was more dominant than the other, because it looks a bit like you're taking sides. It could fuel one in the relationship, one in the couple, to say, there you are. Even the counsellor thinks you're, talk too much.
Right.
And also the other thing to also think is that the power could be in the one that's being silent. It may look like the one who's saying a lot has the power. So it's best to let it burn itself out and find its way, and perhaps make the kind of intervention that Alan's just described.
But only when you're desperate.
Yes.
Right, okay. Like at the kind of last resort.
It's very unusual to need to do
Yes.
that. I probably would say that to somebody about once every 2 years. You know, it's not a very common thing to happen
isn't.
at all.
That's right.
But and I suppose the other really important theoretical point for us is we're not trying to change power dynamics within the relationship. So if that's the way they want to be, that's up to them. It's not for us to try and change it.
Yeah. So that, like, the way the power is shared in the relationship might work well for the couple.
And in any event, it's their choice, not our choice.
I think couples have their own language, they have their own way of behaving, and it's not really for us to tell them how that should be.
Yeah. Well, and like, it can be so easy when you're watching someone else's partnered relationship to make assumptions, and it's almost always wrong. Like, who's the most powerful one? Who's this? Who's that? Like, the only way to know is to be in that relationship, I guess, or in the intimacy of the counselling room. Something will come.
Yeah.
I think we really don't know what goes on behind closed doors. With anybody, really. We really don't know.
Yeah.
And remember, of course, because we've got no objective, because we've got nothing we're trying to make happen, it doesn't really make sense for us to push in any direction.
Yeah.
I suppose the other thought that I think might be relevant and maybe partly helpful to the person who asked the question is, I think if there is a sense that somebody's being quite dominated and the other one isn't getting an opportunity to say how they feel, if what little things they do say, if you really turn up the empathy, try and really get the sense of what that feels like to them, and if they feel understood, they're much more likely to feel free to talk, and also their partner may actually hear your empathy and listen.
Because we don't want to lose them either. We don't want the one who is dominating to take over the session and the other one to disappear. We're still trying to have psychological contact with both.
Yeah. So, and it could be easy just to miss the tiniest things from the client who's doesn't seem to be saying very much.
At the most basic level, literally, we sit looking at both of them frequently. We really are looking to pick up everything that's going on for the person insofar as we can.
Yeah.
And that's also lets both of them know that we're with both of them.
Yeah. So that's really important to create that, with both experience. Yeah. And as you're getting started, I guess you're contracting with the couple, you're getting into the relationship. Do you kind of sketch out that process for them, or how much of kind of what you do would you say, or how does that work? I can see you shaking your head, Alan. No,
Kate says more than I do, but that means that Kate says about 3 sentences and I say about half a sentence.
Right, okay. So it's practically the same.
Very, very little indeed.
I think we both let them know that we want to understand each of them. And I will often say that while I'm listening and understanding one of you, the other might feel that I'm on their side, but actually I'm doing that with both of you. I'm on both of your sides. So I might add that extra sentence that Alan doesn't say.
So that is the second sentence.
That's a sentence.
That's the sentence.
Okay, I love that.
I trust they'll just figure it out from the way I am.
Okay. Well, and it sounds like that happens. Like, couples come and they find their rhythm with you both in your different ways.
Because of course we're both our own individual people as well. So I think for any counsellor, you take yourself into the counselling room and you interact who you are and the way you are with people as well. And we will all be that little bit different.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about that expression that Charlie O'Leary uses about multi-directional partiality, or am I getting that right? Or is that kind of similar?
Partial to both.
He talks about being partial to both. He talks about, I think it's multi-directional empathy.
I'm getting the phrase mixed up.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
it's very important.
So being on the side of both couples, but both couples, both people, both individuals, absolutely, but in a way that the other person can see. It's not that you're not on the other person's side. It's in that moment you're completely focused.
Yes, and sometimes I will actually explicitly say to people, "Look, I can see you've got an enormous dilemma and problem here, and I'm not pushing this in any direction. I'm staying with you, and I'll stay with the difficulty."
Yes. Yeah.
And can we come back to like that, the staying with, like in terms of like how you see the theory? Because this is I think this is what makes person-centered work so challenging. Like to be able to really stay in that place and not to move into like, I'm going to do something now. And,
that's right.
And like, how are you thinking about that in terms of the theory? And I guess you've said some of that, but it's very much about like that person's actualizing tendencies is going to come out and lift them or take them somewhere. Or
well, it's this basic theory, isn't it, that if we offer the 6 conditions, therapeutic change will take place. So to start with, very often we're offering those 6 conditions to each of them separately, and they get to the point where they're starting to offer it to each other as well. Even when they've got to the point where they're offering it to each other, there can still be difficulties. They can still be confronting some very, very difficult issues.
But I think each has their own process. Each individual has their own process. And I think to start wanting to do something could run ahead of the process they need to have. And I wouldn't want to miss out a chunk of someone's process and where they need to get to.
You can't short-circuit it, you can't speed it.
And they can be at different places in their process, which can be difficult for each of them because they wish the other wishes the other would hurry up and be this, that, or the other, and the other thinks that they're running too far ahead, and they can be in different places, and it's staying with each in where their process is.
I'm thinking of a good example of that might be a couple who one of them wants to have a baby or another child, got 2 before we finish, let's have a 3rd one, or my career is going fantastically well, the last thing I want to do now is stop and have a child. Now, you could be at the point there where nobody's trying to mislead anybody, they're both being very honest, they've just got genuine differences of positions, and each of their positions is really important to each of them, and we won't try and push that in any direction. We will stay stuck with their pain.
Yeah. And is that what you mean about the process? Like I think this is a word I love, but often my students will say to me, "John, what does process mean? What are you talking about?"
It's that thing that goes on inside you, isn't it? It's the realization that the world isn't the way you thought it was. Completely out of the context of couples counselling, but I had the experience a couple of months ago. I went to Europe a couple of weeks after the Paris shootings, and the whole of Europe was really tense. And I found myself at one point in Germany, surrounded by armed German police. And I realised that it felt incredibly safe. These guys were talking to me, explaining what they were doing and explaining why, and I felt safe with them. Now, I had to take that away. I'd never before felt safe surrounded by armed police. And so the processing in my mind was the world isn't the place I thought it was. It turns out that armed police can be okay, which is not a very British way of seeing the world.
Right.
So as I say, I know it's out with couples work, but it's that sense that that process had to go on inside me. I had to examine how I felt and take on board that I was experiencing things that were unlike what I'd experienced before, and I was reaching a different conclusion. And that I'd give as an example of processing within a person.
Well, that's a powerful example, isn't it? I know that's not in like the couples counselling work, but that, like, it takes time for us to think things through, to discover ourselves.
Giving up the way I thought the world worked, which was that armed police are dangerous.
Right. Okay.
Let me as far away from them as possible, please. So my understanding the world turned out to be wrong. I had to change it. I had to review it.
And people have different speeds of process. Some people need a lot of time to process something, whereas someone else might go a lot quicker. And that can cause frustrations in a couple when one knows exactly what they want to do and how they want to do something, and the other one's still deliberating over it, and it can be frustrating. But they need to do that in order to get to their place of certainty.
Yeah. Like, if we go back to that example about, like, are we going to have another child, or are we going to stop here? And like, one partner might be really sure about what they want, but it's the waiting on the other partner to kind of...
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, this idea of having a child is a really lovely example of that, because there may not be unlimited time. The door's closing, time's running out for me. I've got to make this decision. I can't wait another 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, so we could easily get caught up into it as a therapist, right? What should I do to help them do this quickly?
Yeah.
But I suppose part of the person-centered theory is about reducing the risk. Like, the safer we feel, the more easily we can process. So if we, like, the not rushing.
You can't make any fundamental change in your understanding of the world when you're feeling threatened. You need to be in a safe place. Only from safety can you change.
Yeah. And, like, this is why the 6 conditions are so central to the work, I guess, to create that safety, so that the organism of the person can then arrive at that place
and dare to change.
Yeah, they feel safe to explore areas perhaps they haven't dared to go near before within themselves, and they feel safer to hear themselves, and
It's really nice to be hooking up these pieces of theory and kind of seeing them playing out in the real world, in different settings too. I think, like, often the 6 conditions can be seen as a starting point, but actually seeing the reduction of risk as the way that we transform, like, the 6 conditions become central then.
And it's a central tool we're working with.
Yeah.
That is how we're working. Let's give you another example of one of the conditions that's so important when it comes to couples work. So I'll have you, John, and Kate as my clients again to illustrate.
Yeah, we're getting lots of free therapy here, Kate. Yeah, this is great.
Been here before, I think.
We have. Yes.
There is a recording of these two married and me counselling.
That's right. Yes, check it out in the library. Yes, The Quiet Scotsman, I think.
Absolutely.
Brief encounter.
Yes.
You've not forgotten, have you?
No.
So John comes to see me, and he starts to explain what the world is like for him, and I listen to him and I empathise, and John thinks, this is good, this guy's understanding me, I like this is really good. But meantime, Kate's listening and saying, this counsellor's an idiot, he's believing all this nonsense that John's telling him, he's absolutely sucked into it. And then it turns around and Kate starts to tell me stuff, and she's telling me her experience of the world and her experience of John, what he's like, and I empathise with her as well, and she starts to think, this is quite good after all, he does seem to be understanding me. But hang on, what was going on a few minutes ago? He seemed to be understanding John as well, and John was taking such a different position. How can that be right? And then I think a crisis develops, which is, do I stay with this counsellor do I stay with somebody who seems to be understanding the person I disagree with so much? But to be understood and empathized with is such a seduction that you sort of say, well, it is fantastic to have somebody understanding me. But what am I going to do about John? Because I like Allan understanding me, but he seems to understand John as well. Hey, what about if I listened to John? What about if I started to try and understand John as well? Now, not everybody makes it to that point, but I'd say most do. And the ones that don't make it to that point only come 2 or 3 times because they conclude it's a waste of time. Because they're not actually ready to do any processing and do any moving. But that's, you know, so that's a really important application of the person-centered theory around empathy and the mechanics of how that works.
Yeah, like it's so potent to have that experience of being understood that it creates that crisis.
Or the other one.
Yeah.
And of course, equally, what I just explained there, where Kate's wondering about this relationship you and I have got, equally, whilst I'm empathizing with her, you're saying, well, you seem to understand me. What's going on here?
Hold on a minute.
So you've both got that same crisis to try and deal with. And if you can stick with that and start listening to one another, then enormous change can take place.
That, like, you're really encapsulating like how dynamic that experience can then be. Like, as I have that crisis and think, oh, but I thought there could only be one person that's right in the world. There can only be one position, but here we are. And
that's right.
Yeah,
and this is it's almost countercultural, isn't it? To I suppose if we go back a few decades, we understood there were lots of views in the world, but the culture we're living in now has absolute rights and absolute wrongs. And so to say, no, there's as many views and opinions and positions as there are people, and they're all valid. That's a very different way of coming at it.
And it's really helpful to think about like what is going on in the person, like what is the intention in terms of like just creating that that crisis, if you like.
What does it feel like to be that other person? What does it feel like to be John? What does it feel like to be Kate? And how are they understanding each other?
I want to grab another question from the chat room. Because I think it catches some of the fear around working with couples, and it's similar to where we were earlier, which, like, what if, I think the question word for word is, what do you do if World War III breaks out? And I guess that's not literally, but
I had anticipated that.
Right, okay.
Let me first of all say that when we do our couples course, and there may be people that are coming on our course watching this, one of the things we do on the very first morning is to talk about what might be difficult about couples work, what might you be worried about, and that's what comes up every single time. They're worried. They're worried about anger in the room. They're worried about shouting. They're worried completely disproportionately, but they're worried about physical violence in the room, which is so rare it's barely worth mentioning.
But we do have a fear of that, don't we? And that, managing that.
And I suppose just that feeling of I won't be able to control it. And as your questioner there says, World War III breaks out. And of course, they may need that expression. The individuals may need the place to express their feelings.
You've probably got 2 very hurt people in the room. And that often appears as anger to begin with.
Absolutely.
But what anger is, it's about being hurt. And the anger may need to come out and burn out first to get to that very hurt place.
But for you as a therapist, hear the hurt.
Yes.
So empathise with actually
it's
how
painful.
frightened that person is and how deeply hurt they have been.
Yes.
So, and I think this is part of the place I was hoping we'd get to, in the sense that, like, there's a caricature of working in a person-centered way that's passive, and I don't think that's what you're describing.
I don't experience it passive at all. I experience it as something that I'm enormously involved in, and I take home with me afterwards because it's powerful stuff. No, quite the opposite of passive.
Well, and like as you're saying, well, maybe like the crisis might even create that, like the crisis of reality, I guess, might create some of that heat, but the capacity of the therapist to stay solid and know what we're hearing. We're hearing anger, but it's actually about something else.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it can be helpful, I think, if the anger goes on, and there's a lot of arguing all the time in several sessions, I might start to say, let's really try and understand what's making this happen. Let's try and look at the components of what's going on here for each of you to try and understand what's causing you to feel.
Let's understand that.
Yeah, as you do.
Yeah.
I think once you start to use words like "this feels really painful" rather than the anger word, I think you start to hit something underneath the words. You start to hit the feelings lying underneath.
Yeah. And like this is where the courage and the perception of the therapist is really important, that if we panic when there's some anger in the room, then how can the couple settle and kind of settle their feelings so that they can hear each other?
I think you make a really good point, John. I think sometimes for us to introduce stability, for us to make it a safe place, and for us not to be scared, make it possible to do it.
Oh, and now we just broke up a little bit there. Can you both still hear me?
Okay.
But so it sounds like you're hearing me. It's breaking up. Oh, I think it's starting to settle down. Could you say that last bit again, Allan? Yeah.
Yes, I think a really important thing is the safety that we can bring to the room. The fact that we're not fazed, that we're not. We don't have to tell people not to shout. We can stay with it. We can stay with people being angry and hurt. And as Kate says, always remembering that anger, there's hurt underneath it. I was in a room once in the States with John Schlein, and he said that. He said, "I've never experienced anger when underneath it isn't pain." Has anybody else here? And of course, nobody had. There's always pain under anger.
I think to have that quiet, calm presence, and where you're not feeling anxious because the couple are having World War III, where you're just quiet and calm and just letting that evolve, I think is helpful to them.
Yeah, and I think that takes tremendous courage and development as a person to be able to be like that with our clients. I think this is often what is missed about the application of the theory.
Trust who you are, haven't you? You've got to trust yourself. You to believe that you've got the resource to stay there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, we've only got about a minute to go. The time has just shot by, and I really appreciate thinking about, well, what's it like for you both in practice? How are you thinking about this in theory, and and how you apply that as a person? To not easy at all. I mean, there are no clients shouting at each other right here with us, so we can think about it dispassionately. But in the real heat of the moment, to be there with someone and still understand what a great resource to offer a couple. Fantastic.
And what a great thing to experience.
It is.
It's a privilege.
Yeah. We love this work. We really do, and it's fantastic.
I can just see that from you both, how much you love it and how much you think about it too. And I guess you do that in the training work.
It's always, I think it's so for anything, always your practice must be informed by your theory.
Yes.
As you do things, you look back and say, how does my theory inform me here? How does this help me understand it? That'll take you through if you look back at your theory.
Yeah. It feels so important to do both, isn't it? The thinking and the feeling part of it is just vital. And I guess then that you can help your clients do the same too, that they can think and feel with each other and be whole people with each other.
But not in a modelling way.
Yes. Thank you for getting that in, Alan. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's so important, isn't it? That distinction between, yeah. Oh, it feels like we could easily talk for another hour about this.
Our favourite subject.
Yes. Well, I've really enjoyed that hour together, and so I want to say thank you for taking time out of what I know is a really busy schedule for you both. So thank you for that.
Thank you, John. Always enjoy talking about couples work.
Fantastic. Well, and I want to say thank you to everyone who's joined us live on the site too. It's been great to have you here. If you're catching this up in the library, thank you for spending an hour with us too. That's great. And I would really encourage colleagues to check out the resource guide, to have a look at the course and have a look at your site, I guess, and the many resources that are there too. Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you, Kate. Thank you, Alan, for spending this time for us. Till the next time we can tempt you back to online events. We'll see you soon.
See you soon, yeah.
Thank you.